Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the UDS F&I Performance Group webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about the conversational interview. I'm John Tabor. I've got Paul Schultz here with me today.
Good afternoon, everybody.
It's an interesting topic. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us again. An interesting topic because I was having a conversation with a pretty experienced F&I person, and we were talking about the menu and being able to do the menu proficiently. And I was talking to him, and I said, listen, we were about scripting and that kind of a conversation. And I said, really the most important piece is the left column and what we teach there. But as we had our conversation, I said, the reality is that the menu is a tool and can be memorized. And even though there is some skill to it, that's not really where the skill is. The skill is at the beginning of the process and to some degree at the end, and being able to bring those two things together. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in the conversational interview. And I think the best way to talk about it is really kind of to set up hey, if you can be a good opener, you don't have to be as good a closer. But let's get started. So what do you focus on when you're with your customers offering products in F&I? There's really three types of focus going on. The product focus, it's when F&I managers are most of their time talking about the products, the features, advantages, and benefits. And that's the way we were originally taught in F&I to sell. We kind of step sold. We went from the service contract to the next thing, and we talked about features, advantages, and benefits. And we want people to understand the product or service so we're trying to entice them to buy it based on how good it is. It's just the best thing in the whole wide world, and my gosh, you should go ahead and take it. That kind of, then we went into a little more of a transactional focus, and that's the goal is I just want to get the person to say yes. I'm going to grind, whatever it takes. They're not leaving without buying something, and I don't care if they just buy something to get out of the office. Not probably the highest CSI, probably isn't the most compliant, and certainly isn't a great customer experience where we make the sale no matter whatever it takes. And then we have a focus which is more a customer needs focus, and it's when the F&I managers go through a discovery, interview, or process to determine if the customer has any needs, wants, or problems, or any objectives they want filled, and then offering products that fulfill those needs, solve those problems, and meet those objectives. And when we have this type of focus, we're establishing a need before initiating the menu presentation, so that when we get to that preferred option, we're really hitting home, because now we're talking about the products and how they will make the customer's life better, solve their problems, fulfill their needs. Here's the thing. A lot easier said than done. I see a lot of F&I people, not going through that process, and they say, John, I'm just too busy, to do an interview. We're cranking here, and I just don't have time. But I tell you what, I'll do the interview. I get it. So let me do it while I'm doing the paperwork and loading the deal, and I'll do it then. The problem with that is that we really aren't very effective. I mean, we could go back to some of the webinars we talked about on communication, but I can tell you that when you're loading a deal and doing paperwork, you're distracted, you're not listening, and you're not communicating.
And they know that. They know that.
They feel it.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's an old adage that I got from a trainer a long, long time ago, but it's really, really true. And otherwise, you're taking a copy of the buyer's order, holding it up to your forehead, and trying to do like the great Karnak and establish what things they can buy.
All right, for any of you on the webinar that are younger than 45, the Karnak is a reference to Johnny Carson, who used to be a late night icon.
I saw that rerun
on late nighttime TV, and he had a sidekick named Ed McMahon, and they used to do this bit called The Great Karnak. Thanks for that reference, Paul. Anyway, Paul brings up a great point. We actually communicate more with our body language than we do with what we say. And when we're distracted and we ask a question of the customer and look away, or we're doing something, they know that we really don't care about the answer. We're just trying to fill some time. So instead of, what we want to talk about and not doing the interview and just doing the menu and expecting the menu to do it for us, instead of saying, don't guess. Know what they're going to say yes to based on their needs. So let's talk about this for a second. Making time for the interview is important. Got into a discussion yesterday, and I had an F&I person ask me, John, I see the value, and I understand it, but if I'm really busy, what can I cut out of there? Right? Which was a very honest, genuine question. And I said, well, let's go down the list. And I said, let's just take the basic questions on in the interview, and you tell me which ones aren't important. And we went down the list, and it was like, certainly the name and address is important. Primary driver, kind of want to know about that. We started going down the list, and he said, well, there's really not anything on there I'd want to get off. And I said, so then at least these are the bare minimum, and you could go out and do that in about 2 minutes if you had to. I'd like it to be better than that, but that's the bare minimum of what we should have before we decide to present a menu. But the reality is, we've had many boot camps, and we do an interview and we try to get them a little more conversational. And if they go 4 or 5 minutes, it's a thorough conversation. If you think about 5 minutes is a long time, and you can get a lot of information in 5 minutes. The problem is, it's a skill. It takes practice. Being able to be effective in an interview and be conversational in a short period of time is not an easy thing to do. It's something that we have to be intentional about and focus on. And here's some interesting statistics. One of the things about, we talk about being trustworthy, building rapport. Rapport and credibility equals trust in F&I. Well, the CBS New York Times poll asked people, what percent of people in general are trustworthy? And the answer was 30%. When they asked it a slightly different, and they said, what percent of people that you know are trustworthy, it went to 70%. So what does that tell us? When people get to know you and like you, they begin to trust you a little bit more. But how do we do that in 5 minutes, right? So we can do it a different way. Here's some elements of building rapport. And before I get started with this, I just want to say, one of the things is we have to control all the things we can control. We have to control our appearance. We have to control our attitude. We have to control our environment whenever we can. We have to be polite. We have to be focused. But, those are the things that we can control. But here's some things that I think are important that you should focus on. First is empathy. Be curious. We have to ask questions. Listen and care to how they're responding. That gets back to that F&I office situation. If I'm shuffling paper, loading a deal, and so I see you live in Palm Harbor. How long have you lived there? I live there too. So I'm gonna, and we're not looking at the customer. We're not focused in on them. They're not going to be focused very in on us and what we have to say. Authenticity. Be real. In working with F&I people. And if everybody probably on here has worked with me, I tell you that my goal is to make you the best version of you. Not to make you something you're not to have you act a different way, but to make you the best version of you. And when I say that, what I'll hear is, well, I don't want to be scripted then. I want to be me. And I talk to them and say, well, you're already using a script. It's just yours. And the one I'm asking you to use is refined and has a purpose for just about every word on it. But at the end of the day, people like people who are genuine. They like people who are realistic. So be yourself. Similarity. We got to find common ground. We're going to talk about that in a second. And a shared experience. Those 4 components, if addressed, usually start to build rapport pretty rapidly. So the question, I guess, right now as we go through this is, are you purposeful in building rapport? Are you using all 4 elements that we need? Let's start out with number 1. Empathy. Listening to understand. Tell me get what you need and how you want to buy. I wasn't listening. I was thinking about what I was going to say next. We talk about that a lot. When we're in this process, when we're interviewing the customer, trying to gain knowledge about them, their life, how they're going to use the vehicle, those types of things, we have to have empathy. The empathy means we're kind of putting ourselves in their situation, and then we're trying to figure out based on that what we offer makes sense for them. And we can't do that if we're thinking about, we're waiting for them to quit talking so we can say something brilliant. Or we're waiting for them, we're thinking about that I got two people waiting for me before, this person, and I really need to hurry up, and all the distractions and all the swirl and all the urgent things that go on in F&I. Empathy. Authenticity, keeping it real. I kind of talked about that, but, be really good at being you. The more authentic you are, the more genuine you are, people will realize that, and they feel it. And when we're not being genuine, they feel that too.
You don't want to be taken as the phony, because
nope.
Nobody's going to trust you, nobody's going to buy from you.
Okay. Shared experience.
Stories.
Shared experience is probably one of the best ways to build rapport. And we see it like, and some of the examples here are like schools or clubs or hobbies, culture, geography. What does that person, can you find something that you have in common, a shared experience? You went to the same college, you live in the same neighborhood, you enjoy the same type of hobbies, and people connect that way. They become part of it. Okay, so if you're into, you have a dog and I have a dog, that's something that bonds us. So all the positive points of that dog that you feel for your dog and I feel for my dog bring us together. As a matter of fact, they start to transfer to each other, right? So the shared experience is a big deal. It really can make a great impact on rapport and your credibility and your trust. So, where can we find that information out? Well, we can certainly look at all the data that we have in front of us. We have the DMS, we have their credit application, we can see where they live. We may be able to, if we are ambitious enough to get out and go look at their trade, and there may be indications there of where their kids go to school, or I love my Shih Tzu bumper sticker, or whatever else they got on their car. But those are the kind of things that we can build on. I can see and I can go and I can mention and start talking about. We can put some visual cues in our office, not a ton of them, but a picture of your family, maybe you doing something, fishing, or I don't know, but something to generate that common interest.
So people bond on similarities. So use those to your benefit, and and be genuine when you're doing it.
Well, similarity is interesting. Well, in doing research, when I say controlling the things you can control, people will mirror body language. If you're open, have open body language when you're talking to your customer and you seem genuinely interested, and you ask questions that make them feel like you're interested, they'll become interested in you. Their body language will start to mirror you. Stories. Paul mentioned stories a minute ago. Stories are great. Humor is great. We're not doing stand-up in F&I, but anytime we can bring humor to it and it makes sense, we should. It makes people relax and bonds them to you. So, real quick, on a problem, here's the thing about problems and needs. If I had to choose between fixing a problem or fulfilling a need, I would pick a need. And here's why. Problems are it's unwelcome or harmful, and it needs to be dealt with and overcome, but not necessarily right now. I don't have to necessarily solve a problem right now. Needs are a little different. And sometimes we approach products and objections based on a problem that the customer may or may not have in the future, especially if we don't know. We're talking about unexpected expense. When we're talking about a VSC, when you're driving down the road and your tire may, hit something, and we're just kind of telling them about what could happen, it may or may not happen, and what that might do in the future. And that's great. But the reality is if I can relate that to something that they do in their life, if I could relate that DSC to a budget that they told me that was really tight, or if I can relate that the tire and wheel to them talking about how much construction there is on the road by where they live or the development, now I've got something that's going to make a lot of difference. And what we're talking about here is offering a product based on a need that we've discovered or perhaps created, and in the interview, and that helps us relate and brings the product to their life, like I said, not only now but in the future. All right. So these questions that are on the screen right now probably look pretty familiar. Right? These are the gosh, you got to ask these kind of a thing. Problem with just asking these is that this isn't conversational. It's more of like an interrogation, and they're yes/no questions. They're one-word answers. Some of them aren't, but if we do these and only these, we're really limiting our ability to learn what's going to relate to them. And really, when you look at these questions, they're really not about them. They're about me as an F&I person. I want to know how long they keep the vehicle, how many miles they drive, because I want to make sure that I'm matching the right VSC. But I'd like to know where they drive, how they drive differently. Maybe they drive different on the weekends than they do during the week. Who's in their car when they're driving? Is it just them? Do they have a family? What do they have kids? Do they have a dog? What's going on? Those types of questions. So this is kind of what the average F&I person asks when they're with a customer. Now these questions are designed, they're a little bit better. They're one step above the basic. They're really geared to understanding how the customer lives in the car, how they're going to use the car. We're really trying to expand that out a little bit so that we can talk about needs, talk about problems, and use logic to close the customer. So, can you explain why the vehicle you picked out is such a good vehicle for you? What prompted you to purchase this new vehicle? What is your favorite feature on the car you bought? Hey, if you could say, if you could change one thing about owning a car other than having to pay for it, what would it be? Can't answer these questions in one word. It requires a little thought, and then they bring up their answer. Now, if you want to get to take the average, turn it into better, and then make it best, we start asking questions like this. Tell me more about that. Well, how did you first start to do that? How does it make you feel when that happens? These questions, when they say something and they give us an answer and then we ask a follow-up question, that's where the power is. That's where we really start to find out the information that we need. And that's really where we start to get a lot of credibility, a lot of trust. And I can prove this by saying, have you ever met somebody that you really, really liked? You just met them and you go, wow, that Paul Schultz is a great guy. But then
many say that.
It's a different Paul Schultz.
The other
Paul Schultz. But that was a really great guy, And then you realize that he was listening to you most of the time while you were talking. And he was asking questions about you and your life and your family and seemed interested, and you perceive that as being somebody that you like and trust. So let's put this all together, okay? We have a product and we have a need. And when we can take the need, address it with the products we have or suggest products based on the need, then things really start to get pretty interesting. Right. And I've got a little thing on my desk here, and I keep it here all the time for anybody that stops by, and it says, sell the problem you solve, not the product you offer. And that's what we should, when we can start doing that in F&I, we become much more effective. Now, here's some things that we can that help us create a credible and effective preferred option, okay? Some of the things that we can say. When you were talking earlier, you'd mentioned that you have kids and that you're constantly taking them to baseball practice and you guys travel on the weekends to tournaments and different things like that. Well, I can probably talk about, the clay that can come in and out of their vehicle off their cleats, the vehicle getting dirty, those types of things. Being on the road on over long distances, we could talk about, trip interruption in the VSC. We can talk about tire and wheel. There's lots of things that we can do just because I know they go to baseball tournaments on the weekends with their kids. Who's going to be driving the vehicle? Well, I drive it. My family drives it. My wife drives it. Tell me a little bit about how they do that. They told me you didn't like surprises earlier, and this is a great way to protect yourself from the unexpected. Now I'm starting to talk about their life when I'm talking about the products, not just my product, and it makes a difference.
There's a story I want to relate. There's a guy, one of the F&I managers that was talking, he related this to me. He was talking with a woman, and he was doing the introduction interview, and he said, so do you use a vehicle very often for work? And she said, no, because I work from home. So he kind of went down the path of she's going to be not driving very much and limited mileage, and a longer-term warranty with less mileage is going to be fine for her. And then he asked the follow-up question, so what do you do on the weekend? She said, my kids are in soccer, and I just drive all over the place, to Georgia, to Tennessee, to other places with my kids for soccer. And he said, so you put a lot of miles on. And it completely did a 180 as far as what his perception of what she might need actually turned out to be, because she put thousands of extra miles on, and she was going to be out of factory warranty very soon. So really set up by being a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more analytical. He found out something that would actually lead him toward the probability of selling her a VSC, which he did.
Thanks, Paul. I want to talk on this next slide. I call this, have credibility at the declination document, and you can be much more effective. And I call this the Mark Israel close. And Mark will be famous in all of my 5-day certifications from now on. Because I was in role play, and he's a F&I person here in this area. He talked about using the declination page and saying with the customer, because he has a lot of credibility with his customers, do you mind if I make a recommendation? And I use that because people who care about you are going to make a recommendation that benefits you. We don't recommend somebody go to a bad restaurant, or we don't recommend somebody use a product that quit working after 2 uses. We don't do those types of things. So when we make a recommendation, customers are going to listen. And I love it a lot better than, do you mind if I ask you a question? Do you mind if I show you something? It's got so much power because you're using that relationship capital that you've built, and you're putting it out there that I'm in a position to make a recommendation to you because I think you trust me and I know a little bit about you. So it's a powerful statement. If you're not using it, I would suggest you do it. So let's wrap it up a little bit. Conversational interview. Instead of a product focus or a transactional focus, focus on the customer, focus on their needs. You can't do that if you're not talking to the customer before they come into your office. It's just not going to happen. When I have new F&I people in front of me and they say, John, if there's one thing you could recommend to me to make me successful, what would it be? And my response is 2 things. 1, be consistent. 2, get out of your office and go talk to the customer and find out what their needs are before you bring them in and create a preferred option on your menu. Remember, people are more likely to trust you even if they know just a little bit about you. So we've got to work that in a little bit. We've got to, open up to customers and find that common ground, find that similarity, and make a connection with them on some level. And the more levels we can make connections with them on, the more interests we share, the more we have in common, the more likely they are to trust you, and that means listen to what you have to say. Don't forget the 4 elements of building rapport. Think about yourself. Think about how you go about what you do in the interview. If you're just asking those questions that we teach and, how many miles you drive, how long do you keep a car, your primary driver, have you insured the vehicle, do you keep it in a garage, all those questions, you're really not using those 4 components of building rapport: empathy, authenticity, similarity, and shared experience. Start thinking of that. Maybe put those on your desk somewhere and think about it when you're talking to, before you go out to talk to customers, so you can put those into play. And don't forget Mark Israel and make a recommendation at the declination document. And how we make that recommendation is to group products together. Other customers who have chosen the vehicle service contract and the maintenance have also seen some value in the tire and wheel because it's a drivability product like the other two. And let me explain to you what they see. And it gives you an opportunity to explain it. Or I want to make a recommendation based on what you told me earlier. You had said to me that this is something, that the condition of your vehicle is so important to you, and that you live over by the beach, and there's construction, going on. So there's a couple of things that you've declined that I think we should talk about. So don't be afraid to make that recommendation at the declination. So does anybody have any questions, or before we move on?
Questions, comments, or we'll take compliments as well if you have the urge to compliment John on another wonderful webinar.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I think they'll hold their compliments to themselves. By the way, if you're interested in getting any of these copies of any of the questions that we have, some of the words that we should use, we shouldn't use, how to build rapport, a little more information on it, feel free to email me at jtaber@udsdealerservices.com. And I'd be glad to send you a transcript of today and a copy of the webinar. Plus, you can go on to our website and view them anytime you'd like. Just put this up on the screen so you can see what's coming up. In February, the Zero Plan, we do a webinar on the Zero Plan a couple times a year. I highly recommend you jump in on that one to help you get that incremental product sales on those ancillaries. Also helps you raise your PVR a little bit, your PPR, and in your income. It's a very well attended webinar, and it's a good refresher, and that'll be next month on the 12th and 13th. We've got Advanced F&I Management Skills Part 1 and 2 coming up in February, and I highly recommend that. It's just a good battery charge. It's a half a day. It's not a strong, hard commitment, but it'll get you thinking about some things that might get you out of the rut you're in and move you into the next. And it's really for people that have some experience and to kind of look at the job a little bit different than you have maybe in the past. We have a certification coming up in March, and the March webinar is going to be an interesting one. I highly recommend you join us in March because I'm going to show you how you can make a lot more money in F&I by doing just a few simple things. And then Train the Trainer at the end of the month. It's going to be a new module for us, and I think it's for all managers in the dealership or anybody who would rather train than complain. So that's what's coming up. Paul, you got anything before we go?
It's a new year, it's a new opportunity, and one of the things, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. If you want to make more money, you want to do better, you want to raise your products per retail, you want to raise your PVR, your per vehicle retail, you can't do the same things you were doing last year and expect to do better. You have to find some opportunities that you can improve on so that you can drive those results for 2019. So you want to shine in 1.9, then John's the man to lead you in the right direction to find those things that you can do a little bit different, that you can tune yourself up, that you can help yourself get to the end of 2019 and find a lot larger 1099 and a larger W-2 than you did at the end of 2018. So I thank you very much for your participation and your support.
Paul, I can't believe it. We're right at 12:45.
So it's time.
It's unbelievable. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day and a fantastic month. See you next time.
Thank you, everybody.